Hello, everyone. We got him back. It's year 4 of me getting lucky enough to have Calvin tolerate me and my Lynx bias for a whole hour of a WNBA preview show. I said his name. Y'all should probably know who this man is if you watch women's basketball. I don't think you can call yourself a women's basketball fan if you don't know who he is. But we'll let him go ahead and introduce himself again and let people know all the places they can find you.
High praise, Eric. Wow, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm on any social media at C Wetzel 31. So my last name is Wetzel. You can find me there. You can find my stuff at a lot of different places, freelance, wherever outlets that I can get opportunities with. So Her Hoop Stats is the main one. I got a weekly podcast over there breaking down women's basketball coast to coast with Karina Mustafa. Some stuff at CBS Sports, some stuff at some other different places. So yeah, look around. I'm sure there's stuff out there that you can go find, including this.
And also, don't let him be modest. He will take gifts if you want to send him sweatshirts, shirts, and all that stuff. Also, send it to Karina, too. That poor girl got left out
Yeah,
twice.
send Karina some gear. I would have worn the Minnesota hoodie for this, but we're talking about the WNBA, and it's also kind of warm out, so I had to wear short sleeves. But if anyone wants to send me anything, Eric knows. Eric sent me a Minnesota, a Mar Braun specifically
Braun
hoodie,
Mamba.
and I wore it on the Coast to Coast podcast. So you send me something, I'll wear it on a podcast.
We're just saying, we might have to get an MVP shirt or sweatshirt for Kelvin. Not previewing who my MVP prediction is or anything of that nature.
Who your MVP is?
And my MVP
I
is,
wonder who that is.
Whoever that is, I don't know. That could be anyone in the league. But we'll kick it off here. Okay, we have a fantastic season coming up. A lot of exciting players. I think one might have came from the Big Ten, who everyone's excited to see. Kevin, what has you the most excited for this upcoming WNBA season?
I think just the fact that women's basketball has so much momentum right now, obviously because of the player that you mentioned, partly, but even aside from Caitlin Clark, I think women's basketball has been growing and it's been growing and it's been growing, and all of a sudden it exploded. We've
Mm-hmm.
seen the college national championship game ratings were through the roof, outdid the men's side, and to see how that momentum carries over into the WNBA now when we're at sort of this tipping point where the TV deal with ESPN is going to be up soon and a new one is being negotiated, and then we have probably a new CBA coming in the next couple of years, assuming the players opt out of this current one when they can, and all of these things happening. It feels like sort of a tipping point for women's basketball right now, and this WNBA season is going to be a big part of kind of shaping the future of the sport. And so I'm just excited to see where that takes us in terms of the growth of the sport and the ratings and the coverage and all of that type of thing and how that looks in the WNBA this season.
Yeah, we're going to have sellouts galore. I can speak as a Minnesota Lynx fan. Probably the game that I think is going to maybe explode in Minnesota is going to be Maya Moore's jersey retirement game against Caitlin Clark. One game for that. I'm like, Target Center might need to find a new rafter or something. We might need to add thousands of seats because that place is going to be maybe even more than the 2016 and 17 finals. I mean, that place is going to be jammed to the rafters.
I've only been to one Lynx game there. I've been there for a couple other things as well. And when I was there, it was Fee's rookie year,
Fee.
and it was the game where Sylvia Fowles broke the career double double record, the same game that Nafisa Collier had her first career double double, and they didn't even have the upper deck open for that game.
Oh, it's open for
That
this one.
forget it, forget about that. Yeah, it's going to be beyond open. It's going to be open and full for this game, and hopefully for some others. Now that we're at that point.
I mean, I think Indiana's going to be pretty well traveled, but you also have the Aces and the New York Liberty, and you have Diana's maybe last ride. I don't know. She might ride until she's 50. Who knows at this point. My only thing, I guess we'll touch on it a little bit. The only thing people like you are really good for, and Mark and Karina and everyone that I really appreciate, you're very good about understanding that we have new fans, we need to welcome them and all that kind of stuff. We also can't erase the history of where we are. We also can't pretend that women's basketball started 2 years ago and that the WNBA hasn't had fantastic stars and legends and that they haven't paved the way for where we are. And that, I think, occasionally needs to be reminded to people that, like, yes, this is great that we're exploding and more fans are coming, but let's not pretend that like the WNBA started 2 years ago, or that it's just starting this year type situation. Like, learn the history of the rich of this game.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a key, I think, for new fans, and it's really timely to talk about that right now when we talk about one of the legends of the game who just retired, and Candace Parker, and a lot of new fans who maybe didn't experience Candace Parker's whole career. And I mean, for me, I've been a fan for 5 years now, so I've been a fan longer than some of these fans who are just sort of tuning in this last year or two because of Caitlin Clark. But I also haven't been a fan for very long in comparison to, I think, people like you and definitely a lot of other people who were around for Candace's whole career, who were
Mm-hmm.
around for some of the other legends of like the 90s and the 2000s. And so I think as a fan, it's really important to kind of recognize where you are at and what you know and what you don't know. And I saw a fan the other day. So Kate Martin, who played for Iowa and is now got drafted by the Las Vegas Aces, and you know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
She signed her training camp contract, and a lot of Iowa fans are new WNBA fans for obvious reasons. And so a lot of people were like, "Oh, this is awesome! She made the team," which not yet. No, she didn't, but they didn't necessarily know how things work. But I saw one fan in particular on Twitter when this news came out that she signed that contract asked a question. So what does this mean? Does this mean that she's safe? Does she still have to earn her spot? And I loved that. I thought this
Mm-hmm.
is a fan who understands that they are new and they want to learn, but they understand that they don't know exactly how things work yet. And so rather than trying to pretend like they know everything that's up, they're just going to ask the people who do know what's up, "Hey, can you teach me what's going on? What's the
Mm-hmm.
situation here?" And trying to learn. And that I wish I remembered who that was. Shout out to whoever that fan was who tweeted that, because
Wanting
that's
to
how
learn.
the attitude we should all have is trying to soak up all the wisdom from people who have come before us and then pass that along to these new generations of fans. And I think we're at a place where that's really important in women's basketball right now.
Yeah, I would. I think I saw the one I would, once again, Calvin gets in less trouble than I do, so on these podcasts. But I would just like to introduce Megan Gustafson to the Iowa Hawkeye fan base. She's probably more solid in the WNBA. And last time I checked, she was an Iowa Hawkeye. So I would just like to reintroduce her to the Iowa Hawkeyes, because I think sometimes they forget that she played at Iowa, just personally. And like you said, coming in from new fans, I can speak from experience in terms of '04. I understand the legend of who it is leading you to the WNBA. I started in the WNBA because of Lindsay Whalen's Final Four run in '04. We followed her along when she went to Connecticut, and like Lindsay Whalen was to Minnesota what Caitlin was, I guess, to the world. Lindsay was to Minnesota. Like, she was, people were comparing her to Prince in her like superstardom when she was in college. And so everyone knew her in Minnesota. So when she went to the pro, the second ever WNBA sellout for the Minnesota Lynx in their franchise, outside of the very first game of their franchise, was Lindsay Whalen's homecoming for the Connecticut Sun. And it was a noon game on a Tuesday. So to me, it's like, I understand that. I said that's why I'm just Megan Gustafson there. Kate Martin has now that Candace Parker, I will speak to as someone who did deal with her whole career as a rival for most of it. Uh, we had to see her win titles in person. We had to see her lose titles in person. She was always, she made an impact on the game, whether it was against your team or for your team. She always made an impact. I always talk about, like, I had a newfound respect for her with her Chicago Sky title, mostly because I thought it was a fair one, unlike 2016, but we won't get there. And I just, there was always, felt like for her, that was one of the first few times that she really took over in that finals. Like, she really brought them home and was the leader and was not going to let them lose. And I really was so impressed with her game, her mentality afterwards. I wish she would still be playing. I liked her on the Aces. I liked that we had more super teams, but congratulations on a fantastic career for her. Maybe she has coaching, broadcasting. Just stay away from the LA Sparks, and we'll be kosher. No bitterness at all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and for me, when I was first getting into the league was 2019, and she was still on the Sparks, but it wasn't that long after that. I think it was 2 years later that she came to the
Mm-hmm.
Sky, and I live in Illinois, so the Sky are the closest team to me, and so seeing her come home where she grew up, in Naperville, just close by to Chicago, and then bring a title, the first ever franchise title, to her
Hmm.
city. I think was a really cool moment. It's something that for me is the biggest thing that I'm gonna always remember from her, and especially that being pretty early in my fandom.
I love it. So we've given Candace her flowers. We've talked about. Let's start there because it's probably as we do in the Big Ten previews. Let's start there. So Calvin, is there any remote chance outside of an injury, which we don't want to happen, but if Caitlin Clark plays every game, is there anyone else that has a chance of winning Rookie of the Year in your opinion, or is that where we're going with unanimous Rookie of the Year already for Caitlin Clark?
There's no chance. I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubble and make the boring take, but Caitlin Clark doesn't even have to play every game. She can miss a few games here and there, which I don't think she will, and I certainly hope she doesn't. Like you said, we never want injuries for anyone, and Caitlin Clark has been very durable. I don't think she missed a game in her college career, so
Nope.
she'll probably play 40, but let's say she only plays 36. Let's say she tweaks an ankle, misses an off game, or she's still the rookie of the year. She would have to miss significant time to not be the rookie of the year, and something crazy would have to happen, in terms of the
Hmm.
season that someone else behind her has. So I think it's a pretty done deal. And even if it's close, if it ends up getting close, she also has that following at this point where the media is going to, right or wrong,
Hmm.
lean in her direction, if
A
you know what I
hundred
mean.
percent. 100%.
And so it's not only that she's the front runner anyway, but you really are going to have to be absolutely, positively head and shoulders above her to even convince some voters to
Hmm.
stray away and vote for someone else. So I don't think there's really any discussion. It's her.
Right. You would think the media would maybe learn from the 2020 bubble season because I felt there was a similar. Sabrina was automatically the rookie of the year, and those stories were already written. And then Sabrina goes down 2 games into her season. We are hoping that does not happen for Caitlin Clark at all. But then they were kind of like, oh, we have to find another rookie of the year because the one that we had pegged in that position already is gone. It's not possible. So I think that's not as much of an issue if, God forbid, Caitlin would have an injury. I think you have a lot of rookies that are in good positions to have good seasons, with the Chicago's to the LA to Alyssa Peely here in Minnesota. I think you have rookies that could put up big numbers. Like so that's where to me I feel like you don't want there to need a fallback. I would much rather have it be like a 2019, like your first season, where you had that Fee versus Enrique, where they both had good cases for it. They were kind of competing for it. Both teams kind of really got behind them, and their both fan bases got behind them. I'd love to see that kind of thing for like a Cameron Brink and a Caitlin Clark. I don't think it will happen. So I think we're getting both of our first prediction out of the way with Caitlin Clark being our rookie of the year. Pretty easy on that one.
We really went out on a limb to start this podcast,
Right.
Eric.
So let's get to my favorite part, and we'll get Calvin more in trouble here than me because I'm pretty simple in this. Who is your MVP? And I had to say the word because I almost said the name again. MVP from Calvin.
Well, I think no matter who you pick an MVP, you might get in trouble with certain fan bases. It's kind of developed into a pretty fun, heated debate, to be honest. And
Mm-hmm.
last year it turned into more of a three-way debate when it had been really just between Asia Wilson and Brianna Stewart for a couple
Right.
years, and then Alyssa Thomas sort of got her way in there, which was cool to see. To me, this year, I think it's Asia Wilson, and not only because I think she has an edge anyway, but I also think voter fatigue is a real thing, and Brianna
Mm-hmm.
Stewart won it last year, and it's really, really, really hard to win back to back, whether it's back to back titles. The Aces did that; they might have
Mm-hmm.
a three-peat, but back to back MVPs, back to back anything, it's so hard, and especially when it's an award that it depends on voters, and voters are ready for someone else. But that's not the only reason why she's going to win. I also think
Right.
she's going to be the most deserving candidate. I think she's the best player in the league. And a
Mm-hmm.
year ago, honestly, I would have told you I thought Brianna Stewart was the best player in the league. I don't remember what I said when
You
I got
did.
on this podcast with you a year ago.
You picked
Did I
Brie.
pick Brianna Stewart?
You did for the
Did I?
MVP.
Well, I
Mm-hmm.
was right. I'm glad. I'm glad. I hit that. I didn't know whether I was going to be right because that was such a tight race, but at some point towards the end of last year, the last month or two, regular season, and especially in the playoffs, I think it started to become clear to me that Asia had taken over Brianna Stewart as the best player, and especially now Brianna Stewart isn't going to play that how she played in the playoffs last year was very uncharacteristic, and
Oof.
she's a lot better than that. I don't think she's going to play like that again, but I do think that showed me that Asia Wilson is here as the number one, as the face of the league, and Brianna Stewart is in that tier, but Asia Wilson is now 1A. Brianna Stewart's 1B for me.
Fair. So for me, I will start with saying this. I don't think Asia Wilson should receive a single fourth place vote. I still would like to
No,
know who did that. Like, there
never.
has to be at some part, like a WNBA behind the scenes, where we find out who voted for that. We have to. I will say this. I'm going to stick to my prediction from last year only because even as wild as the season was, they finished under 500. They started 0-6. If you said it kind of turned into a three-person race. Number 4 was Nafisa Collier. And Nafisa Collier showed, I think what really hurt any kind of serious consideration for Nafisa last year was that they somehow won games at Connecticut and at New York when Nafisa was out injured. Don't ask me how. Not a clue. I will say, I think if you look at the only first-round playoff series to go the distance of going to a best of 3, there were arguments that there were moments where Nafisa Collier, even with Alyssa Thomas on the court, was the best player in that series. She does everything on both sides. So to me, and I'm glad you brought it up, the voter fatigue, I don't think people are going to give. It was an issue last year when Stewart got it on one side of it. I don't think they're going to give it to Stewart again, as great as she could be. I actually, fully biased, I would put Nafisa Collier going into the season over Alyssa Thomas. Alyssa Thomas is still great. I think Fee is coming into that where she's ascending into her prime, into that MVP level. The franchise is completely on her shoulders, similar to a Sil, a Maya, a Simone when they were in their primes. I just think if the Lynx are going to have any sort of success, any sort of top 5 seed in this league, Nafisa Collier is going to play at an MVP level. So my vote is MVP. And I don't think there's going to be a moment where she's outside the top 4 or 5 in the league. I agree with you. I think Asia's the best player. I'm hoping that the depth of the aces maybe sometimes lets Asia take a night off. She doesn't have to take a night off. Or she doesn't have to kind of be on every game because they are so deep. I think, so maybe Fee doesn't really have the same luxury of being like, I can take a night off and we have a chance in that game.
And to your point about Fee, I think, well, first off, I don't know if Asia Wilson is the type of personality to ever take a night off, unfortunately for the MVP case. But the flip side of the MVP case is that Nafisa Collier is probably, when you talk about those 3 and then her as the top 4, probably the only one, maybe Asia, but probably Nafisa is the only one that's still, I think, significantly getting better. I think, Alyssa Thomas is on the back end of her prime. Brianna Stewart's very squarely in her prime right now. Asia Wilson, sort of at the beginning of her prime. And then you have Fee, who I don't think has really reached her prime yet. She's probably still a year or 2 away from really hitting that peak of what we're going to see out of her in her career. So, and you're right, she was basically, you had that 3-person race last year that was neck and neck and neck. It was just so fun. And then next was Fee, obviously. And so if she continues to take that next jump, she can insert herself into that conversation. And she has every chance to do so, especially with, like you said, how she's being asked to carry that team.
And one thing I like about it is it's with all the position that all 4 of those players are at, we see them get a lot of times, like, voters are very visual. I think you get to see them go head to head. Like Alyssa Thomas is guarding Fee. Fee is guarding Asia and all them. Asia is guarding Stewart's guard. I like seeing that visual because it's like they can go head to head. Like, let's see who's better on defense, who's better on, like, what are they finding? And then I think it kind of pushes all 4 of them to be better. So I said the nickname is right there. Eventually in her career, she has to get MVP. Like, it's right there.
I think she's going to get one at some point this year or later. It's going to happen.
Same. So I said we got our second prediction out of the way. The other ones, these are a little more dicey because it can kind of go multiple different ways. So we'll spin it a different way. We'll start with coach of the year. Any coaches that you're like, hey, you could see them win coach of the year. These are kind of why, or maybe top two or three coaches in the league, why you think they are those coaches and why they could be those coach of the year discussions.
Well, it's tough this year because usually coach of the year is someone who sort of exceeds expectations with what they are given. And it's tough when you look at, I mean, some of the best coaches, I think, are also the ones at this point whom the most is expected out of, and they have the best rosters. Obviously, Becky Hammon, and then you look down the list at like Sandy Brondello and Noel Quinn, I think is a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic coach, but now they have a quote unquote super team who's probably put themselves into, which I'm sure we'll get to, the conversation for third in the league. And if they get third, as I expect, could she be in the Coach of the Year running? Maybe. I think LT for Dallas, if they're able to continue to build on what they did last year, and especially without Satu Sabali for the first couple months of the season because of that shoulder surgery,
Mm-hmm.
and still basically stay at that level, I think she could be in the running. There's a lot of candidates. I'm leaving one intentionally for you to talk about because I know you're going to, and I don't want to steal your thunder. But honestly, I have a very hard time figuring out who it's going to be this year. I think it's sort of wide open in a
Mm-hmm.
sense.
See, my thing is, I'm excited to see the new coaches because all of them are coming into, I guess, different situations. You have Teaspoon in Chicago. In Phoenix, you have first time coaching a female team, WNBA team, so you don't kind of know where you're going there, but you have a lot of talent over there in Phoenix. Teaspoon has kind of depleted talent, but you have two good rookies. You have Christie over in Indiana, who they haven't made a lot of noise, but now you're kind of expected to make. I don't know if it's fair to say a lot of noise, but there's going to be a lot of noise around you, whether you make noise or not, wins and loss wise. So I think coaches like that, like if you could see a Teaspoon get this Chicago Sky team to the playoffs, that to me is a coach of the year performance with what they've lost. Noel Quinn, if Seattle is that third and fourth, only because we'll get more into it, but I'm just not 100% sold after the big four on them. I think that it's a little bit of house of cards behind the big four if you're trying to rely on being a super team. I think I said LA. If everything you lost there, if you get there with the two rookies that you have, maybe Kurt Miller's in that discussion. So I think rookie of the year or rookie coach of the year could come down to maybe a team that overperforms what their expectations are. Like if you're expected to maybe be in the lottery and all of a sudden, hey, we're getting that sixth and fifth or sixth spot or even seventh, that's a win for some of those coaches with the rosters that they may be coming in with, in my opinion. And Cheryl Reeve's just the best. Like let's be honest, Cheryl Reeve's the
I've been
best.
waiting this whole time for you to bring up Cheryl Reeve.
I will go to
It took
battle
you
with
a
Cheryl Reeve
while.
as my coach every year because she will. I think she can outsmart a lot of coaches in just basketball in general. So I will take Cheryl Reeve as my coach.
Well, I think she's got a good shot because when you look at what they brought in terms of their roster, I think they're well positioned to maybe jump up into the fourth or fifth spot in the league. And I think especially if they're able to sneak into the fourth spot and host a playoff series, I do think Seattle is third, and then you have those two top teams from last year in New York and
Mm-hmm.
Las Vegas. But if they can host a playoff series, I think you got to take a long look at Cheryl, and also like you said, Kurt Miller, LA. Like if you're LA or Chicago, or I'll even throw Washington into that mix, and if you're one of those three teams and you make the playoffs as an eight, you could be under 500. You get into the eight seed with the roster that you're given with those three teams, you're coach of the
Mm-hmm.
year to me because I think those three teams are fighting an uphill battle to get into the playoffs. I think there's a gap from 9 to 10 in my mind, and if one of those bottom three teams can somehow pull that off and sneak into the 7 or 8 spot, coach of the year.
100%. I could see it. I think we're going to see an unprecedented. I mean, we could even see all four teams that miss the playoffs jump into the playoffs and see four other teams drop. That's how good I think all those four rosters that missed kind of improved. And I think we've had other teams unfortunately get dismantled.
There's been a lot of movement for sure throughout the league, which is going to be super interesting to follow.
So we'll start at the top. Ace is your number? Do you have them the top seed again? Kind of they're in cruise control a little bit.
I do, yeah. I think the Aces, someone's going to have to really dethrone them before I even think about putting anyone else in the number one spot.
Fair. You're the champs until you're knocked off the throne. And we got New York. I think we agree there. I am cautiously agreeing on Seattle at 3. What I'll say, what we're talking about a little bit is, so you have NECA, you have Skylar, you have Jewel, and you have the center,
Ezzy
Ezzy
McMagor.
McMagor. Those 4 solid. I'm good with. It's after that where I'm like, we know unfortunately injuries happen. If you have a serious injury to one of those 4, or let's say it's Skylar or Jewel, do you have the depth to maybe make up for that? Granted, injuries can harpoon anyone's season. I just think behind those 4, when you're trying to go against a New York and a Vegas and stuff like that, teams that can bring off like a firepower off the bench, like Vegas has an Alicia Clark that's maybe coming off the bench. I mean, that's a lot to bring off the bench. And when you are running with a big 4, and granted, they could always, you have Nika Mule could be a really nice backup point guard for them type situation. That's my only concern with Seattle. Is like, I don't know if their depth will withhold a 40-game season. If anything happens to that big 4, if they kind of tire out, wear down a little bit. That backcourt is still relatively younger. They're still not really. But NECA's kind of, we're hitting a little bit more. I don't want to say she's over the hill, but we're starting to get to the peak of the hill of what's been a great career for her. So maybe she slows down a little bit, and then you're like, oh, okay, now we look a little less super teamish.
It is tough because when you look at the big 4, they're 4 all-stars. Ezzy is very young still. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have Jewel, who's 30, who's still in her prime, but she is on the wrong side of 30 now. And the other 2 are coming up on 34. They're going to be 34, later on in the season. And Skylar Diggins Smith and Nneka Ogwumike. So you got to imagine, and especially in Skylar's case, coming off a year out of the league with her pregnancy, that neither of them are going to be playing 40 games this year.
Correct.
And if you had depth, maybe that wouldn't necessarily be as big of an issue. But your point about depth is a much bigger deal when you talk about a core of top players who might not be able to all be on the court for the entire season. And then all of a sudden that depth starts to really come into play. And so you're going to be relying a lot on, I think, your vets and Sammy Whitcomb and Mercedes Russell to step up. And then you have a lot of young players that you're hoping at least one of them takes a big leap. And Jordan Horston,
Mm-hmm.
Dulcie Fenka-Mengiadu, and we'll see who makes the roster, obviously. But Jaden Melbourne, who all were rookies last year, some rookies this year. Then Nika Mule, who you mentioned, and I think you're gonna need one of those young players to take maybe sort of an unexpected leap and become a significant contributor in year 1, year 2 of their career. And if you get that, you don't really need all of them to hit, but you're probably going to need at least one of them
Mm-hmm.
to hit. And if you get that, then you might be in okay shape. I do think it's probably going to be some growing pains early on in the season as they sort of develop that chemistry like we saw with New York last year, but at the end of the day, they have enough talent that I still think I would have them at the number 3 spot. I know there's some talk about maybe can they even compete with New York and Las Vegas. I don't think they're there yet, but I do think they're pretty solidly in that next tier for me.
So I have 2 teams I want to talk about because I think they're in interesting positions. You mentioned one already, so we'll start there. Is the Dallas Wings a little bit in trouble this year? Because without Satu, and like you said, till August, maybe even after the Olympic break, maybe, I'm looking at the roster and I'm like, you have Big T, you have Enrique, you got JC Sheldon, who, by the way, if there's not a bigger star coming into the league than Emmy Sheldon, I'm just saying, huge fan. Like that sister connection, I mean, I would have been in tears if I was at the draft. I love her sister. Like, as a Big Ten fan, we've seen her at all these games. Emmy Sheldon needs a show. I'm just saying. But like you have JC coming in, but you look at kind of outside of their big 3 or 4, you're like, oh, without Satu, you're like, this, it's not looking as solid as maybe originally had for Dallas. What's your thoughts kind of on their like expectations? What maybe to temper expectations, or maybe I'm just completely out of my mind and I'm undervaluing some of their players.
Well, I think Dallas, uh, they really don't have a particularly high ceiling or low floor in the regular season. I think without Satu, especially, I don't think they're going to be able to work their way up into that tier that we just talked about in the top 3. But at the same time, we also talked about the bottom 3, who I think are below everyone else,
Hmm.
and Dallas is going to sink anywhere close to that. So you have this group of, I would say, 5 through 9 or so that is all it's all going to be one big mess. And it could be one of those situations, I think, where you get to the end of the season and 5 through 9 is like one game apart, and it's like the last day of the season
Fair.
determines whether you miss the playoffs or whether you get the 5 or 6 seed or something like that. And I think Dallas is part of that group. I do think that missing out on Satu obviously is going to hurt them a lot, and I don't see them actually falling to the 9 seed and missing the playoffs, which would be devastating if they did. And assuming they do make the playoffs, I think this could end up helping them in the long run because, and I said this on the podcast I recorded today, it's coming out tomorrow with Karina, that gives a lot of opportunity for a lot of young players to develop and get some run, get some meaningful minutes. And it depends on LT how they play it, but you could have a three-guard lineup with J.C. Sheldon in there next to, Dangerfield and Enrique were the starting backcourt a season ago, and both coming back. And you could also bring in someone like Matty Segrist, who got limited playing time last year as a rookie, or Lopez Seneschal, who was
Hmm.
out last year as a rookie and now is back with the team. You could fill that spot with someone like that. You also have Stephanie Suarez, who was a rookie last year but didn't play, like
Hmm.
Lou, who's back with the team now. And so there's so many young faces on this team who I think are going to get more opportunities while Satu's out. And if that can help them develop and bring their game along, build chemistry with the vets, then I think by the time Satu's back, now that's a win. Now you're in a better position than you would have
Hmm.
been otherwise. Maybe not seed wise, but going forward on the court.
Fair. And let's be honest, Dallas, you have an ace in the hole for the next year because if you get the Chicago Sky's first round pick in 2025, you might have a point guard coming your way from UConn. So maybe I don't know, but I'm just saying you might have a point guard from UConn coming your way. So it's a nice place to be where you're like, hey, we're building with young players, and worst comes to worst, we have two of the top four picks with a superstar coming out of UConn next year. So not the worst place. Next one I want to ask about, which has been entangled with my favorite team a little bit, played them in the playoffs last year, the Connecticut Sun. We saw DeWanna Bonner look fantastic. We're getting another year older in her career. We have their backcourt. Heidemann came to Minnesota, but they get Tiffany Mitchell and Rachel Banham. So you get a little more shooting there. You have Banham comes in with, I shouldn't say shooting, Banham's a shooter. Tiffany a little more like physicality, bigger guard. And then Rebecca Allen goes out to Phoenix. What's kind of the feel around that team? I mean, I feel like they've lost. I feel like Heidemann and Allen were big pieces for them last year, but it's not like they're a complete empty cupboard.
It's not empty cupboard. It is a lot of questions in the backcourt, though. I think the front court is one of the best front courts in the league. And DeWanna Bonner, who ages like fine wine, I want to say she's second oldest player in the league now after Candace retiring
Yep.
behind DT. And she's still, at least as of last year, playing high level basketball. And Brianna Jones coming back at the center
Mm-hmm.
position from that injury last year is big. And then, of course, AT. AT is AT. So your front court, great shape. Your backcourt, you have some pieces, but you got some question marks because it's all new. Like you said, everything that they had last year, it's totally turned over in that backcourt. So now you talk about the two that you mentioned from the Lynx. Mariah Jefferson is another one. Dejanay Carrington, and so Ty Harris. There's a lot of pieces here that could have potential, and either some vets who you kind of know that they're going to be solid, but not like all WNBA type contributors, or then you have some young faces as well who have potential, and we'll see if they take another jump in their career. But it's going to be up to Stephanie White, who is the reigning coach of the year,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of figure out that backcourt rotation and the minutes and kind of how she distributes all that and developing some of those younger backcourt pieces. So it's going to be a challenge, but I do think that they still are in the running and right in the mix as sort of that next tier contenders. I have Seattle third, and then I think the Sun could be as high as fourth still, even despite what they lost in the backcourt.
I said I felt like the playoff series between the Minnesota Lynx and the Sun, they kind of switched. Like we were always kind of a project at the point guard position where it was kind of Tiffany, sometimes K Mac ran it, sometimes Bantam ran it. we were kind of and now I feel like we're pretty solid bringing Courtney Williams and Heidemann over. We're solid in our backcourt now, and we're there a little bit. Like they took our players. Some of them like Banham, and so they're kind of like they're. But it could be a Ty Harris situation where, I mean, if there's a breakout player kind of poised for it, like we saw her in the playoffs have big moments. Ty Harris can be that point guard and kind of it's kind of there for the taking to kind of lead that team right now from the point guard. So I agree with you. The front court, Bonner's going to hit Tina Thompson level threes. AT's going to do everything. Brianna Jones is automatic. I mean,
and if we're being honest, in terms of the point guard, DeWanna Bonner and AT can kind of be a makeshift point guard.
AT is your point guard.
Yeah, so I mean, you're fine even with that revolving door and question mark there. They're going to be fine.
Fair. So now, before we get to where I try it again with the plus minus with the betting master, we'll have to talk about them a little bit. My talk comes, people expect it from me. I want your thoughts on the links. We talked about Heidemann. You got Alana Smith. You got Courtney Williams coming in. Year 2 of Diamond and Dorka. MVP's roaming out there. K-Mac and MVP, I thought, towards the end of last year was one of the best 2-player games that we saw. Like, their pick and roll was fantastic. They both could lead, played overseas together, and I think K-Mac won MVP. I think we're just I'm confident to a certain extent, but I want an expert's opinion on thoughts on the links.
Well, you mentioned betting and the over-under type of stuff, and it's interesting that you bring that up because one of my bets that I have already placed on the WNBA season is Minnesota Lynx over 14.5 wins. Woo. Sounds like a really low number to me. I don't know about you, Eric, but there's 40 games. You don't have to even win. You don't have to go 500 to clear 14.5. You go 15-25. So I am pretty high on the Lynx, at least compared to that number. But I think that, like I said, they have a potential. They're another team like the Sun has potential to get up to 4th. And Kayla McBride is on the back end of her prime, but she's still one of those players who always does the exact same thing. And what that thing is deliver. She just is consistent year in, year out. You know that you are getting a dog, you are getting a hooper, you're getting a shooter, and you don't have to worry about what Kayla McBride is going to bring to the team. And then they addressed that point guard spot. Courtney Williams and Tisha Heidemann are really big additions for this team, I think, compared to kind of what they've had at that spot the last few years. And I love the addition of Alana Smith as well from Chicago last year, who took a big jump in her career. She's still only 27, which seems crazy to me. It feels like she's been around longer than that. But last year was the first year that she really developed into what she is now. And so having her, especially without Jess Shepard and losing Natalie Achanwa, and I think I said this on the podcast as well. I know you listen to my podcast with Karina, so you're going to hear all the same stuff twice, which is great. I think that's a big addition in that front court when you lose those pieces like that. Then I think she fits really well next to Fee.
What I'm excited for, I think, is more. I think there's a really fast pace to this team. I think especially like you have a Diamond, you have a Courtney Williams and a Heidemann. They want to go. And the best part is they're also smart players that are not going to, well, Diamond, we're getting there. I love Diamond, but we're getting there on the smart part of it. But when they're going in the back and the defense is backtracking and fighting to get back, and all of a sudden you have K-Mac at the top of the key 3, a trail 3, or a Fee top of the key 3. That's where, you're going to open up and give them openings for them to be out there while these 3 are running up and down the court flying and making the defense get back. And then, hey, we're not getting back out to K-Mac, or K-Mac's driving past you, or Fee's driving past you, and now we're pulling in defense. So I'm excited for that we can play in a faster pace than maybe the Lynx have ever played. They've always been kind of a slow down, pounded into Phil when she was there. It's kind of been now even though Fee can play all outside and inside, you still kind of pound it into Fee because she loves to be in that paint area and floaters and mid-range. And so to me, I think now we have a backcourt and we have a team that can run a little bit faster and put a little more pressure on, I would say, teams like a Phoenix or, some of the older teams in the league, that we can then say, you have to get back or you're going to get burned for layups. And we used to be the team that struggled to get back and we got burned for layups. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. That sometimes comes with a little bit of crazy and a little bit of out of control, but Cheryl Reeve will grow and let them, I think, help them control the out of control. Hopefully.
Well, I had to look up the stats because you know me, I'm a numbers guy while you were talking, and you're right. The Lynx have not been in the top. Well, they've been in the top 5 in pace, which is basically top half of the league once in the last decade. That was in 2021. They were 4th. And so they really have not been a team that likes to push it, but they have the personnel to do so now. It'll be interesting to see kind of how Cheryl plays that, but I agree that's something to watch for.
So now we're going to try it. We're going to get Calvin on the over-under. We're going to get his prediction. That's where we're getting him in trouble a little bit. So, no. We will start.
Ready.
Okay, let's see. Okay, if I do these wrong, we're just going to true or false or getting rid of this. So, Calvin, over-under, DT, we're setting the line at 20.5 games played this year.
Oh, games played. I like that. That's a funny one. You know, I'm going to say over, and here's why. I think that the Mercury obviously added a lot of talent over the offseason, and they may be a little bit deeper than the Storm, but they're not very deep. When you get past number 6, it's basically a bunch of training camp contracts. And I think if the Mercury, they're obviously going for it. They traded their draft pick, new owner. They're clearly putting their chips in. And so between the fact that it may be Diana's last year, who knows, maybe she's still got 10 more years in her, we don't know. In between the fact that they know that in order to get where they're trying to go, that they're probably going to need those top 6 to all be on the court. I don't think you're going to see Diana really take a whole lot of, like, quote-unquote, rest days. She's probably going to get hurt at some point, and she's probably going to miss some games. But I think if she can play, she's going to play. And so I think the games that she misses are going to be the ones where she really has to miss the game, where she can't play. And so I would definitely not bet on her playing 30 games, but I think she can get to into 20s.
So he's taking over. He's taking over the 20.5.
Taking over.
So speaking of staying on the court, Diana Taurasi, over or under, we're setting the line at 8.5 technicals total in the season.
Easy over. I don't even need to look at any numbers. I don't need any analysis. You can't set that line high enough.
Now we're going back to our pick for Rookie of the Year. Over or under, 19.5 points per game from Caitlin Clark this year.
That's an interesting one because that bet actually, the first 2 you brought up just kind of were made up. That one actually does exist. There's sports books that have that, and I've seen it anywhere. I've seen some that have 19.5. I've seen some that have up to 23.5, which is a wide range. I think it falls in between that range, so I would take the over on 19.5. I definitely don't see her getting to like a 22 or a 23 type of a range. You know, Arike is the most recent example I think that we have of obviously a very different player, but just a rookie who came in ready to score at that level, at that volume, and Arike averaged 19.1. So I think Caitlin can maybe beat that by a little bit, but I don't see her getting much past it. I'll take an over, but not a big time over. Maybe like a 20 to 20.5.
This is my Big Ten, seeing her for 4 years, coming out here in the next one for Caitlin Clark. Same with her, 8.5 technicals on the season, over or under?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. You know, she's going to, like I said, probably play all 40 games, so she's actually going to have more chances to get technicals because the thing about Diana Taurasi, when you're not playing, well, no, that's not true. I was gonna say when you're not playing, you can't get a technical, but you can get a technical on the bench if you're street close. So she has done it. So you know what? I'm wrong about that. But that being said, Caitlin Clark, I'm gonna say under, although, you know, I'm debating now. I don't know. I think she's measured enough. I think I'm gonna say under.
We almost did over under of how many they get when they play each other after all the drama that came from the UConn Iowa fans, but we skipped that one. Indy, 20.5 games win this year, over or under?
20.5. That's another one, right? There's a real bet, and I bet on it, and it was 22.5, and I took the under at FanDuel. 20.5 sounds a lot closer. This is why you're better at this than the sports books are, Eric. You're hanging better lines.
Hey, my second year trying it because last year I bombed it, so we're trying here.
Well, you're growing. You're getting good now. 20.5 is pretty close. I'm still going to lean under. I think here's my thing with Indiana, and they're obviously going to be a much improved team, and Caitlin Clark's going to make a big difference. But when you look at the Fever last year, the Fever won 13 games. All right.
Hmm.
And so looking at the difference from last year to this year, they add Caitlin Clark, massive difference. You have a year of improvement from players like Aaliyah Boston and Alyssa Smith. That's going to make a difference. And then you bring in Katie Lou Samuelson. That's all going to improve your team, but is it going to give you
And
eight,
And
nine,
Dantas.
10 extra wins?
Dantas coming in.
And that's true. You're right about that. I should mention that. Lynx fan, I know you're not going to let me forget about that one. I don't know. That 8, 9, 10 win improvement feels like a lot to me. I definitely see them improving by maybe like 5 or 6. I'm not sure if they get to 21 or 22. But I think 20.5 is pretty close. I'd probably say about 19 or 20. So I'll lean under.
See, we're trying to get him in trouble here. No. Next one.
No, when I'm extremely wrong, you can clip this. When they win 30 games, come back and throw it in my face. I'm all good.
The next one you've already kind of hinted at that you went over on 14.5, but we're going to say Lynx 20.5 what games win over or under.
20.5. That's another one that I think is really close. Again, you're better at this than the sports books are.
They won 19 last year. They went 19 and 21 after being 0-6.
Yeah, I think they kind of have a history of slow starts. If I'm remembering, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think last year was the first year that's happened to them. So
Post Dynasty, yeah, that's been slow starts.
Exactly. So I almost want to say like over under wins from June on, because who knows what happens in May. But 20.5 is pretty close. I don't know. This one is going to get me in trouble because I'm definitely going to be wrong, because it's such. I just have to give credit to you, Eric. It's a great line. It's a very close line.
Wait to see
Honestly,
the
I
next
think
ones.
it's 50-50. You gonna make me pick? You gonna make? I'll pick.
Over,
all right,
under.
all right. I'm gonna say over. I'm gonna say 21 exactly.
Fair. I'll take it. I will take that. Trust me. This one I'm curious to see. Over, under 34.5 games win for the Aces.
That one, I'm gonna say under,
I thought
and
I
I
went
have to
high
double
for a
check
reason.
myself on this. You wanted me to take the under. Well, yeah, it worked. You got me to take the under. Before I am wrong, I'm double checking myself, but 34, yeah, that's what it was last year. 34 is what they won last year, so they actually would have to improve on their season last year,
Mm-hmm.
which was a historic season, in order to get to 35. I'm not saying that they're not necessarily going to be like any worse or any better, but the thing about getting to 35 wins is that like there's not very much room for error there. You know, you have one off night on the road against the Liberty or the Storm, and you shoot 25% from three, which happens to every basketball team ever. Even the best ever just have an off night. There's a loss, you know, and then you have another game where maybe one of your players tweaks an ankle, is out for the game. Maybe the other team shoots really well. There's another loss, and it's 35 is a lot. I'm gonna take the under.
Fair. And now the last one. The 4 teams that did not make the playoffs last year were the Los Angeles Sparks, Indiana Fever, Seattle Storm, Phoenix Mercury. Over, under 2.5 teams out of that 4 make the playoffs this year.
It's a great question. I think Mercury and Storm are pretty safely in. Sparks pretty safely out. And so 2.5 is a good question, because it really comes down to, do the Fever make the playoffs or not? Obviously, a lot of people think they will.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite as confident in that. I could see them getting the 9 seed, but I'm going to still lean over on 2.5. I think Fever are probably at least over 50-50 to make the playoffs.
Look, the man's trying to keep people out of his DMs because the fans are going to go nuts if you don't go against for Fever. So he's smart. He's playing it smart.
Well, I already took their under, so.
Fair. As I'm saying, you're playing
Whatever.
you're
Come at me if
nice
you
and
want.
even. You're keeping them out of your DMs. So you give them some, you take some. So now my favorite part, because I've only gotten it right once in the 4 years, and I've only been close once.
Well, you nailed it once if you're going where I think you're going.
What is your finals matchup? Are we getting a rematch of New York's Aces? Is someone going to sneak in there? This is pre-training camp signings, injuries, all that. Right now, who's your finals pick?
think it's a rematch. I think if I'm wrong, I think the Storm could have something to say about it, but these two teams are basically both running it back, and I don't. Again, you got to take the throne. Las Vegas has the throne until someone takes it. And honestly, sort of the same thing for New York in terms of the second spot. I think New York is the second best team is still until someone proves that they aren't.
Who's your winner out of that? And then I'll go with mine.
I think the Aces have a three-peat. I
Have
think
a
it's going to
three-peat.
happen.
Fair. Not the latest three-peat since, I think, the Houston Comets.
Believe you're right. That's the only three-peat that's ever happened the first 3 years of the league.
Correct. Mine, I'm going to surprise you. I'm not picking the Lynx to make the finals. It hurts. I will agree with you on the Aces, and I think the Aces win. I'm going to say Phoenix meets them there.
Okay.
There's something about Diana's possible last year. I think BG is now going to be a lot more comfortable this year in terms of last year was her first year after the horrible thing that she went through, the issues and stuff. I think she's still kind of trying to feel her way through I mean, at times BG just didn't seem like BG. I think you've had an off season now. I think she can kind of decompress. She can kind of relax a little bit more in this off season. I think you had that, and you had Copper, who's now Diana doesn't have to play defense. You have Copper, who can go play the Sabrinas and play all that. I think if you have BG getting back to that MVP type level, goodness, Nafisa Collier got to get a new name, but MVP type level. You have Copper, who showed she can be at that type of level where she can lead a team. Cloud to me is a huge because Cloud's someone that kind of has that dog in her like Diana, but she's younger and will actually play, and so there's a lot of physicality that comes from this defense. I could see them like roughing up Sabrina a little bit, being able to kind of have BG. Maybe if she's coming out and guarding Stewie or JJ, I'm going to go with Phoenix. I'm going to say the Aces still win the title. I agree with the three-peat, but I think Phoenix gets there in a last hurrah, possibly, for Diana Taurasi.
You're rolling with the girl dad, huh? Girl dad year one.
Right.
Getting the team to the
Mostly because of
finals.
Cloud and Copper. I think now they have defense where Diana doesn't have to play defense, and she can do her roaming or whatever she does on defense.
Well, in Beck Allen, if you're going to talk about defense, you got to
Shooting.
talk about Beck Allen, a huge addition to 3-and-D wing that is going to make a big difference for them.
So, I mean, that's where I'm going with Phoenix. I'm not willing to say they're the third best team, but they seem to find a way once they get into the playoffs, Diana really knows how to ramp it up when the bright lights shine on. That's been her whole career. So I'll go with Phoenix gets there, and I'll go with Aces. But Aces get them. Asia Wilson is outstanding. Chelsea Gray, she lives for those. I mean, you want to talk about the brightest lights. Chelsea Gray lives for those moments. Are you kidding me?
Playoff Chelsea, there's nothing like playoff Chelsea on this earth. Nothing.
Yeah, don't remind me. It's super fun when Chelsea Gray is going against your team in the playoffs. It's super fun. That's why the 2017 title should be even a double or something. Like, we beat Chelsea Gray in the finals. And Candace Parker.
You should get yeah, you're right, a separate banner just for that. Beat Chelsea Gray in the finals.
Remember, Connecticut was very proud that they knocked out Candace Parker in the playoffs. That was one of the banners they wanted to raise, if they knocked Candace Parker out. So I wouldn't raise that banner, but what do I know? Well, Calvin, as always, you put up with me for this whole thing. You tolerated the Lynx bias. You gave us your bet. I got good at the betting thing this year. Next year I'll even be better at it because we can give more lines. And by the way, where I get good at that? I was watching Calvin's podcast. Where can they find you on the podcast again, Calvin?
Yeah, I always tweet it out, or retweet it at CWetzel31, but it's from Her Hoop Stats at Her Hoop Stats, so you can go look at the Her Hoop Stats podcast feed, and it's called Coast to Coast. In every Tuesday with Karina Mustafa, it'll be coming out.
You get nicknames in there, you get wordplay, you get pancake talk, you get everything in that. So make sure you watch that podcast after you watch this one.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on, Eric.
Absolutely. This is year 4. Let's see if one of us will get. We got the finals. I said you got the finals right last year. You had the wrong champ. So this year you might get it right.
I hope so. I'm due. I haven't nailed it yet.
If Phoenix doesn't make the playoffs or something, I'm gonna look just real bad. But we'll find out. And people can DM us if you have issues. Iowa fans, be nice. I should have had you say true or false. Kate Martin's going to make a roster, but we won't get you that mad at people. We won't get people that mad. We'll save that for the next one. We'll see if she makes a roster. But once again, thank you everyone for watching. Calvin, I cannot say thank you enough. It's always a pleasure. Once again, make sure you follow him. Make sure you listen to his podcast. Me, I'm going to talk about the Gophers and the Lynx and occasionally other basketball, but you can follow me as well at Erica Junior All-Star on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you.
Recording stopped.